Oh. Okay, I think we're live. How's it going, everybody? Chuck Holton here, coming to you from Panama. And some breaking news going on. Before we even get to the topic of today's live, I got to touch on the shooting at the Dallas ICE facility. Early this morning, about 6:40 in the morning, a sniper opened fire from a rooftop targeting a Dallas ICE field office. Now, they say, there are conflicting reports here. Some say that 2 people were killed, and some people say that 3 people were killed. In any case, one of those people was the shooter himself. When law enforcement approached the location where he was shooting from, he took his own life. And at least 2 people have been wounded on top of that. The people who were killed by the shooter were both detainees, or all of them were detainees, not law enforcement. However, it appears that this was an ideologically driven shooting. I'm just telling you what we know so far. So it appears that it was an ideologically driven shooting, politically motivated. They say that shell casings were found with anti-ICE markings on them. This is getting weird because this feels like a copycat event after the shooting of Charlie Kirk. I mean, scratching or etching things on your bullets is not something you normally see. It's not something we've seen a lot in the past. I take that for whatever it's worth. But the shooter, as I said, died of a self-inflicted gunshot wound. No ICE or law enforcement agents were injured so far. Also, we're going to get to the Houthi drone strike on Eilat, Israel. And before we do that, I want to just talk about the fact that I have been saying that this was going to happen. I've been talking about the rise in, or the lack of civility in America, the rise in politically motivated violence, and the potential for a local or generalized loss of civility in our neighborhoods because of this. Because at some point, people in your neighborhood are just going to get really tired of the protests and the attacks and all the riots and things like that. And if we get to a point where good people are tired of of sitting back and watching it, if we get to the point where good people feel like the government and the law enforcement is not doing anything about it, and they start to take matters into their own hands, things could get very, very violent very quickly. And that's why I invest in gold. I've been reading a book over the last couple of days about the biblical case for gold and for Bitcoin, believe it or not. And, it makes some very good points. The reason why fiat currency is not just bad for poor people, it's actually immoral. And the reason it's immoral is because it is not just weights and measures. As it says in the book of Proverbs, that we should have just weights and measures. We should not steal from the poor. And do you know, when the government engages in quantitative easing and things like that, meaning pumping billions and billions of dollars into the economy every month that they just make out of thin air, what that does is reduces the amount of buying power of people who hold dollars. And so it's stealing from everybody. It's a backdoor tax on everybody. And one of the reasons why gold over time just continues to go up is because of things like that, because gold is not subject to those things. So, if you are getting ready to retire, or if you're just getting started, either way, you should be thinking about at least some of your portfolio in gold. Now, the best place to do that would be to go to preservegold.com/hotzone and text Chuck to 50505. One of those 2 methods can get you connected with the people at Preserve Gold. I recommend Preserve Gold. I've talked to them. I know the CEO up there, and these guys are honest. They will help you figure out and navigate how to go about what's the best way for you to put some gold into your portfolio, whether that's taking physical delivery of gold at your house or putting some physical gold into a 401k or IRA. Either way, you need to check out preservegold.com/hotzone, or like I said, text Chuck to 50505 and do that sooner rather than later. Okay. So thank you to Preserve Gold. Now, on top of the shooting, actually, I thought, gosh, I got so much to go through today. This is just some live shots from Dallas. As you can see there, a ton of law enforcement and kind of locking the whole place down. Apparently, it seems like, from what we know so far, and you have to be careful about that because what we know so far is actually very little, and a lot more details can come out in the next 72 hours or so. But what we know so far makes it seem like the shooter was specifically targeting ICE. He was anti-ICE. That would make him more along the lines of Antifa. And you recall back a few months ago that a squad of Antifa, about 10 people, attacked an ICE facility in Dallas also. So this is the second time now this has happened. It's ironic then that the guy ended up killing a couple of detainees, not striking any law enforcement officers, because he shot at one of the vans that they were transporting the detainees in. Look, folks, this has got to stop. We got to take a stand against this, and we can't allow this to continue to be the case. And so good on the Trump administration for designating Antifa as a domestic terror organization, even though that wasn't even a thing before, and for really taking the handcuffs off of ICE and federal agents to arrest and prosecute these people. And let's hope that we see some Antifa facilitators, Antifa members getting not just slapped on the wrist, but actually doing hard time because of their shenanigans, because we're seeing a lot of this at the ICE facility in Portland, at the ICE facility in Chicago, and now in Dallas. Very, very bad. Okay. Now, on top of that, more breaking news. There was a Houthi drone strike in Israel down in the southern city of Eilat just a few hours ago. The drone was launched by Yemen's Houthi militants, and it struck that southern city. I've been there many times. I spent my birthday there last year, and I think I've got a video of the drone coming in. So this is the drone here. You can see it kind of descending. That's a good sized drone. That thing's got about 30 kilograms of explosive in it. And it goes down beyond the line of sight there and then strikes. Oh, turn this back up. And of course, some woman's got to scream bloody murder. I don't know why women do that. That is kind of a pet peeve of mine. But screaming never helped unless you're trying to get somebody's attention, and screaming after the fact doesn't help at all. But that's pretty much the noise my wife makes whenever she's driving with me. So I'm used to hearing that, those kind of screams. And I have to say it's not her fault. She's perfectly justified in screaming like that when she drives with me. I try to drive nice, but it's kind of hard when you're used to driving in war zones. So at least 20 people were injured in that bombing. The IDF says that they attempted to intercept that drone and failed. That happens sometimes. The IDF is pretty good at taking down those drones. Heck, half of the drones that and missiles that the Houthis fire at Eilat or at Israel never even make it to Israel. They blow up on their own on the way. And the ones that do pretty much always get shot down. But there's always the one or two cases where one gets through. And in this case, it looks like it hit a hotel very close to the hotel that I stayed in on my birthday. And at least 20 people were killed, maybe 22 people. No deaths so far, but a couple people are grievously injured. And so we need to be in prayer for them. You can bet there's going to be a response to this by the Israeli Air Force down in Hodeidah or Sana'a in the next few days. Most of the injuries were caused by shrapnel. The victims have been taken to the Yosef Tal Hospital, which is right there in Eilat, I believe. It's just kind of right across. One thing that we did saw, which was kind of gross, One thing that we did see, which was kind of gross, is video coming out of Aqaba, which is right across from Eilat. I mean, you could swim easily from Aqaba to Eilat, like in 1 minute if you wanted to, because that border comes right down to the water. And so on the Jordanian side in Aqaba, there were videos of the explosion and Arabs in Aqaba cheering. That's gross. You know, that's not the kind of thing you want to cheer, even if it's on your enemies. Okay, it's serious and it's unfortunate. Now, let's move on to talk about what the kind of the topic today I wanted to really get to, and that's President Trump's UN speech at the UN General Assembly yesterday. If you missed my live about the potential terror attack that was thwarted yesterday by the Secret Service, where they picked up more than 100,000 SIM cards plugged in, ready to attack the network, and they could have easily taken down the cell towers all around New York, which would have caused absolute chaos and could have been the precursor for another terror attack. That, I think, was an important live, an important story, and you need to go watch that if you haven't already. And so make sure you're subscribed to the channel, hit the like button over there, and tell me where you're watching from in the chat there if you haven't done that already. We like to see where everybody's coming in from, and it's amazing. You can watch and just see people from all over the world. It's really incredible how many people there are who are, you know, just from everywhere. So I think President Trump overall did a pretty good job at the United Nations. He spoke for 56 minutes. For most of the leaders who get up and speak at the UN General Assembly speak for 15 or 20 minutes. President Trump speaking for only 55 minutes is a win, I would say, because he likes to often go for 2 hours or more. So he touched on a lot of subjects, and I'm going to get into a few of them today because I want to focus mostly on what he has done, what he was saying about the war in Ukraine and about NATO and how he addressed the United Nations. First of all, he called out the UN and called them corrupt at a high level and on large scale. He related a story in which several years ago, he offered to renovate the United Nations headquarters. They were saying they needed to renovate and they were putting out for bids. And he bid $500 million. He said he was going to put in mahogany. It would have been beautiful. It would have been really nice. And instead, they paid almost $4 billion to some company that put in a bunch of plastic, and it just is not lasting and doesn't look good. And then President Trump went on to mock the fact that as soon as he got on the escalator to go to his speech, the escalator broke down. When he started his speech, the teleprompter broke down. It looked like it came back online later, but there is some speculation that that was intentional, that people were just trying to mess with him and troll President Trump. But if you thought trolling President Trump by getting rid of his teleprompter, that would have been a really bad thing for President Biden. That was not a bad thing for President Trump. He was happy to speak, and he probably went longer without a teleprompter than he would have if they had kept the teleprompter on. And so that probably was not a smart thing to do if it was intentional. I don't know that it was. Either way, he made fun of them for that. and went on to brand Iran as the world's largest terror sponsor of terror. He reiterated that Iran can never have nuclear capabilities. Now, Iran actually got up to speak at the UN General Assembly as well. And what they said was, we don't have any intention of ever having nuclear weapons. However, the same day, news came out from Iran that they are trying to rebuild their facilities, specifically their missile production facilities. But we have also seen that they've been trying to clean up and sort of renovate the damage that was done to their nuclear facilities. So actions speak louder than words here. President Trump justified the strikes that the United States made on Iran and said that it was necessary to stop this state sponsor of terror. And then he moved on to talk about Hamas. He says he favors a ceasefire, but Hamas has rejected it. Even at the same time, there is news today that Hamas has changed their tune a little bit as the IDF continues to push into Gaza City and just decimate Hamas every day. It looks like they may actually be open to a ceasefire that would be about 20 days. It would see half of the living hostages returned. So about 10 hostages would be gotten out for a 20-day ceasefire. That may just be Hamas bloviating to try to, get some breathing room, try to slow things down. We'll have to wait and see if they actually come to an agreement there. They may at some point, as Hamas has that pressure put on it from the IDF, they may very well see some movement there, and we'll have to wait and see. However, here's what President Trump had to say about Hamas, and I just wanted to play this for you because I think it is illustrative of what is going on with President Trump and his relationship with Israel and with Hamas. Take a listen.
Hamas has repeatedly rejected reasonable offers to make peace. We can't forget October 7th, can we? Now, as if to encourage continued conflict, some of this body is seeking to unilaterally recognize a Palestinian state. The rewards would be too great for Hamas terrorists for their atrocities. This would be a reward for these horrible atrocities, including October 7th, even while they refuse to release the hostages or accept a ceasefire. Instead of giving to Hamas and giving so much, because they've taken so much, they have taken so much. This could have been solved so long ago. But instead of giving in to Hamas's ransom demands, those who want peace should be united with one message: release the hostages now. Just release the hostages now. Thank you.
So he's calling out the countries like France and the UK and Canada and Australia and Belgium and others who recognized the Palestinian state. He said it was a reward for terror. And that's very true. Good on you, President Trump, for calling that out. That is exactly what he should have said. He urged unity on freeing the hostages. He put all of the onus on getting hostages out. Look, that should have been the refrain from day one, both from Trump and from Netanyahu. Release the hostages. Just release the hostages and just keep pushing into Gaza. Just keep bombing the heck out of Hamas. And every time anybody complains, your only answer has to be release the hostages. Release the hostages. That's all. You've heard me say that over and over again. So good on President Trump for that. Now, President Trump went on to talk about the war in Ukraine and sort of slammed NATO countries for still buying Russian oil. Why are they doing that? Because they're stupid and they have shut down all their coal-fired power plants, all their nuclear power plants in the name of, green energy, which cannot provide enough energy for Europe. And he said, it's just really embarrassing what they are doing. They're funding both sides of the war. They're funding the war against themselves, is what he said. So take a listen to that one, because I think that is pretty powerful. Let's see here. This one.
I'm the president of the United States, but I worry about Europe. I love Europe. I love the people of Europe. And I hate to see it being devastated by energy and immigration. This double-tailed monster destroys everything in its wake, and they cannot let that happen any longer. You're doing it because you want to be nice. You want to be politically correct, and you're destroying your heritage.
He went on, and that's toward the end of his speech, where he was really talking more about the environmental stupidity that these countries are engaging in, and saying that's why we pulled out of the Paris Climate Accords, because they were stupid. And Europe is slitting its own throat by closing down all these coal-fired power plants, natural gas power plants, things like that. And they're still importing energy from Russia. So if you want us to put more sanctions on Russia and put more pressure on Russia, those sanctions aren't going to do any good unless you yourselves stop funding the war by buying Russian energy and Russian energy derivatives. Because in some cases, they're not buying oil or natural gas directly from Russia. But what they are buying is derivatives of Russian oil and natural gas that come from Turkey or Azerbaijan or some other countries. And so it has to be a concerted effort. And you'll see in a minute, we'll talk about how President Trump is really changing his tune on Ukraine. But before we get to that, again, good for President Trump. He said all the right things on, calling out the UN for being corrupt, irresponsible, for causing more problems than they solve. And then he talks about, he's the next clip I'm going to show you, he's criticizing the UN, but in the same way, he probably should take his own words to heart. So this is my only kind of criticism of President Trump today. Take a listen to what he had to say about empty words that don't solve war.
The United Nations was saving and stopping of these wars. But later I realized that the United Nations wasn't there for us. They weren't there. I thought of it really after the fact, not during these negotiations, which were not easy. That being the case, what is the purpose of the United Nations? The UN has such tremendous potential. I've always said it. It has such tremendous, tremendous potential, but it's not even coming close to living up to that potential. For the most part, at least for now, all they seem to do is write a really strongly worded letter and then never follow that letter up. It's empty words, and empty words don't solve war. The only thing that solves war and wars is action.
Empty words don't solve war. The only thing that solves war is action. President Trump has given Russia about half a dozen ultimatums to come to the negotiating table to stop the war in Ukraine. Russia keeps mocking Trump and keeps just blowing him off. I mean, literally just blowing him off. And yet he gives him another deadline, 2 weeks. We'll wait 2 weeks. We'll give them 2 weeks to come to the negotiating table. You have to do something in the next 2 weeks. If not, look out, things are going to change. But then he never really does anything. Just after that speech he gave yesterday, he was asked about, are you going to put more sanctions on Russia? Is this These incursions by Russia changing your mind? And he said, well, we'll find out in a month. So now President Trump's given Russia a month. He's doing exactly what he's criticizing the United Nations for doing, and that is issuing strongly worded condemnations and then not backing it up. Now, you could argue that the UN has much less ability to actually back things up with action than the United States of America does. There's a whole lot more President Trump could do to back up his words with action than the UN could do to back up their words with action. So President Trump needs to take his own words to heart. He went on to call it embarrassing there. He said the U.S. would join with those sanctions if Europe went first and finally cut their Russian oil and natural gas. The problem is that some UN members like Hungary and Slovakia are saying, we're not going to stop buying gas from Russia. We got no problem with Russia, which just shows, getting everybody on the same sheet of music in the UN is pretty tough to do. Now, President Trump went on to mention biological warfare, biological weapons. And I've seen a lot of people on social media who have said, aha, President Trump just proved that the United States had bioweapons labs in Ukraine. Well, if you listen to what President Trump said, he said no such thing. He was not talking about the United States. He was talking about other countries. And if you look at the countries who are actually pursuing biological weapons research, that would be Russia, Iran, and China, and North Korea. Okay? That is not the United States. And so I want you to hear what President Trump said, then I'll talk a little more about that as soon as we come back from that.
We know, and I get to view it all the time. Sir, would you like to see? And I look at weapons that are so powerful that we just can't ever use them. If we ever use them, the world literally might come to an end. There would be no United Nations to be talking about. There would be no nothing. Just a few years ago, reckless experiments overseas gave us a devastating global pandemic. Yet despite that worldwide catastrophe, many countries are continuing extremely risky research into bioweapons and man-made pathogens. This is unbelievably dangerous. To prevent potential disasters, I'm announcing today that my administration will lead an international effort to enforce biological weapons convention, which is going to be meeting with the top leaders of the world by pioneering an AI verification system that everyone can trust.
AI verification system, that's interesting. So what he's announcing there is an initiative to stop global bioweapons development. Now, I've talked about this far too much, but I have to talk about it again. There are some small subgroup of people in the United States, typically on the right, conservatives, who are firmly convinced that the United States had bioweapons labs in Ukraine, and that's part of the justification for why Russia had to invade and kill a bunch of civilians. The problem is that is a perversion of the truth. There's a small kernel of truth in that the United States was supporting several biological labs in Ukraine, but that was for biosurveillance. That was not offensive bioweapons. There's a big, big difference. What the United States was doing was improving various labs, like I'm talking veterinary labs and things like that, labs that dealt with stuff coming off of farms in Ukraine, to enable them to tell the difference, to improve their detection capability, to be able to tell the difference between, for example, naturally occurring anthrax, which exists in the soil of pretty much every farm on the planet, and weaponized anthrax that takes a nation state to create. Most labs that deal with veterinary science have the ability to detect anthrax, but they can't tell the difference between weaponized and non-weaponized anthrax. So we were giving them the money to improve their capabilities so that they could function as an early warning system if they detected biological weaponized anthrax in various places around the world. A good friend of mine that'll be here tomorrow to visit for a week was a part of that program, and he can tell us all about it. I may have him on if you want to hear all about it. Russia took that kernel of truth and twisted it to say that the United States was developing bioweapons in Ukraine. And a lot of people kind of extrapolated from the fact that there was irresponsible research going on biological stuff, not weapons per se, but the Chinese were taking another lab that we did support, and they were using that support to try to, again, without us knowing, to try to weaponize some biological, create some biological warfare stuff. I have to be careful about how I say that so I don't get kicked off YouTube. But they kind of added all that together and said, aha, the United States had bioweapons labs in Ukraine. That is false. I went to the locations of several of these labs. They were not bioweapons labs. I've been to bioweapons labs in 2 places in the United States. Number one, if the United States was developing bioweapons labs, it would not be in a foreign country. It would be in the US, because that stuff is unbelievably dangerous, like world-ending dangerous. And we would not trust that to some veterinary clinic in a residential area of Kyiv, which is where one of these labs was located. Okay, so that's ridiculous to say that we would do that in Ukraine. Number two, the Russians have been using this as propaganda. And so if you have found yourself believing that there was U.S. bioweapons labs in Ukraine, you are the victim of Russian propaganda. Point, period, end of story, full stop. The United States used to have a bioweapons program, and it was stopped the year I was born in 1969. Okay, so we renounced the development of bioweapons and destroyed all of our bioweapons stockpiles in 1969. And we continue to be against the development of biological weapons because we realized that they could be even more destructive than nuclear weapons, and nobody needs that. That's exactly what President Trump said, and kudos to President Trump. Somebody in the chat was saying, stop criticizing President Trump, give him some support. Look, I support President Trump when he does something good, and he said a lot of good things in this speech yesterday. I will reserve the right to criticize President Trump when he does something stupid or says something that is counterproductive to American values or American objectives, okay? And I think all of us should have that ability. President Trump says he wants an AI verification program to enforce the Biological Weapons Convention. I would need to see more details on that. I'm not sure exactly how that works. We need to be a little suspicious of AI, trusting AI to protect us in any way because of what happened on October 7th. The Israelis had a robust artificial intelligence program that was supposed to be alerting them if there was an attack coming from Gaza. That AI did not work, and we saw what happened on October 7th. President Trump went on to continue to hammer Europe for fueling illegal migration, for allowing illegal migrants to come in and destroy Europe, and said, it's just really unfortunate because Europe used to be such a nice place. And you know what? He is 100% correct. I've spent a lot of time in Europe over the last several years, and I can tell you, if you went back 30 plus years, the first time I went to Europe in 1987, and compared what Europe was like then to what it's like today, it's sad. it's sad because Europe today, Western Europe today, is overrun, without a doubt, overrun by North African and Middle Eastern migrants, people coming from failed states, people who have never lived in a civilized society in their lives, and so they don't have any idea what a civilized society looks like. Because of that, they are bringing the problems that they were trying to run away from and just importing them to Western Europe. And so everywhere you go in Western Europe today, it's dirtier, it's more dangerous, it's less culturally, I don't know, beautiful. The culture that you used to want to go to Europe to see in terms of the architecture and the food and all that is all being diluted very, very badly. And Western Europe is not all that great to visit anymore. If you want to see what Europe used to look like, go to places in Eastern Europe that have not allowed a ton of migrants in. Places like Hungary, Czech Republic, Armenia, places like that. And if you want to go to Armenia, go with me. We have a trip that's going next June 13th through the 23rd, and we will be taking a group of people to tour Armenia. If you say, why would I want to go to Armenia? You just need to do some research on Armenia because it is all the wonderful things that Europe used to be, and it's safe and it's cheap and it's friendly, and you're not going to be confronted with nasty graffiti and human feces and homeless people laying about on the streets. And so actually, yeah, somebody's saying Poland in the chat. Yeah, Poland is actually really nice too. But Armenia is super. So Mama Marissa just put the link in the chat. If you're interested in joining us on our trip to Armenia, click that link. And Mama Marissa, how come you're not going? I'm just saying. We'd probably come up with a friends and family discount for you, Mama Marissa. We'd really like to get you on one of our trips. So you got to just get your passport and start saving your shekels. Diane Britson went with us to Armenia, and she wanted to move there when it was over. We get that a lot from people that go to Armenia with us. So I highly recommend that you join us in Armenia. We've got a few slots left, so don't miss it. President Trump went on to say that only strong borders will solve problem and working to solve the problems that cause illegal migration at the source in the home countries can fix it. And perhaps that's why the President Trump didn't meet with him, but the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, met with Ahmed al-Sharaa, the interim self-proclaimed president of Syria. And I wanted to get the video, but I didn't get it up in time. Al-Sharaa did an interview with General David Petraeus at a breakout session at the UN General Assembly. And General David Petraeus just like French kissed, slobbered all over him, like, oh, are you getting enough sleep? Because, we're all big fans of yours. And we really, and I'm like, what? Under General Petraeus's leadership, when he was in charge of the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, when he was the supreme Allied commander over there, that same Ahmed al-Sharaa was serving prison time, 6 years in prison in Iraq for being an al-Qaeda operative, for trying to kill Americans, for calling for the death of Americans. And nothing has really changed. He's shaved his beard and put on a suit, but other than that, Ahmed al-Sharaa is still a terrorist. And how do we know that? Because you can see what his people are doing in Alawite communities, in Christian communities, and in Druze communities across Syria. I heard from some of my friends in Syria yesterday, and they said that there's a heavy fighting going on between the Kurdish SDF forces and the general security forces of al-Sharaa's people in central, along the Euphrates River there in central Syria. So all these people are just slobbering all over al-Sharaa like he's the second coming of Christ, but he's not. He is a wolf in sheep's clothing, and it dishonors the memory of many of my friends who fought and died or lost limbs and eyesight and things like that in Iraq for General Petraeus to be slobbering all over a legit al-Qaeda terrorist who just happened to be able to overthrow an even bigger terrorist and kick him out of Syria. Are things better in Syria than they were under Bashar al-Assad? Yeah, probably they are. And a lot of people are going back to Syria now, moving back in there. But that doesn't mean that al-Sharaa is the guy that we should be throwing our weight behind. And it just puts a real bad taste in my mouth because of the sacrifices that were made by our soldiers in Iraq and Afghanistan for us to be now putting this guy on a pedestal when we had him in prison a few years ago because he was an al-Qaeda operative. So, President Trump went on to dismiss global warming as a hoax. And then after the speech was over, he put out a post on Truth Social that I want to go through in its entirety, because what it represents is a complete 180 turnaround. Testing 1, 2. Okay, there we go. All right. Sorry about that. The power just went out at our house in West Virginia. I mean, in Panama here. That happens from time to time. Usually everything's on a UPS so that we can keep running. But from the beeping I'm hearing off to my right, it sounds like our UPS went kaput. So probably time to replace that thing. Okay, so anyway, what I was saying is that President Trump made a post on Truth Social that represented a 180-degree turnaround from his previous position on Ukraine, on the war in Ukraine. And that is pretty surprising. So I want to go through this in its entirety and talk about it because this is crazy. I mean, it's amazing. Let's read this and then we'll talk about it. So this is President Trump's Truth Social post. He says, after getting to know and fully understand the Ukraine-Russia military economic situation, and after seeing the economic trouble it's causing Russia, I think Ukraine, with the support of the European Union, is in a position to fight and win all of Ukraine back in its original form. With time, patience, and the financial support of Europe, and in particular NATO, the original borders from where this war started is very much an option. Why not? Russia has been fighting aimlessly for 3.5 years, a war that should have taken a real military power less than a week to win. This is not distinguishing Russia. In fact, it's very much making them look like a paper tiger. When the people living in Moscow and all of the great cities, towns, and districts all throughout Russia find out what's really going on with this war, the fact that it's almost impossible for them to get gasoline through the long lines that are being formed, and all the other things that are taking place in their war economy, where most of their money is being spent on fighting Ukraine, which has great spirit and only getting better, Ukraine would be able to take back their country in its original form, and who knows, maybe even go further than that. Putin and Russia are in big economic trouble, and this is the time for Ukraine to act. In any event, I wish both countries well. We will continue to supply weapons to NATO for NATO to do what they want with them. Good luck to all. Donald J. Trump, President of the United States. Power came back on. Wow. Let me just say, holy cow. I mean, that represents such a massive turnaround from what President Trump has said in the past. It's hard to even know where to begin. It's like, let's go through this kind of line by line, okay? First of all, President Trump is now saying all the things that I've been saying since the beginning of the war. Just to get that out there, not to brag or anything, but President Trump is coming around to my way of thinking. And it makes me wonder how all of the, diehard MAGA Trumpophiles who just won't broker one shred of criticism for the president. Everything the president says is 100% right. He's the second coming of Christ, and you cannot contradict him in any way, shape, or form. What do you think now? Now that President Trump has changed his mind and agrees with me? Because I've been disagreeing with President Trump on Ukraine for a long time. And now all of a sudden, he's saying exactly what I've been saying since the beginning. Okay, so just to get that out there, how do you feel? Are you now angry with President Trump and you think he's wrong? Or are you saying, oh, well, President Trump can't be wrong, so he must have been right before and now he's right again? Well, his positions were diametrically opposed. I wonder how the vice president feels about what President Trump posted. It will be interesting to hear his next interview that he gives when he gets asked, how do you feel about Ukraine now? Because Vice President Vance has been incredibly hostile to Ukraine. President Trump and Vance both have acted like it's Ukraine's fault that this war started, which is ridiculous. They've acted like there's no possible way that Ukraine could beat Russia. Russia's much, much bigger country. And that's true. But as I've been pointing out, the economic issues that Russia is facing do actually give Ukraine the possibility of winning. Now, let's ask this question. Why in the world did President Trump make such a 180-degree shift all of a sudden? It came right after he met with President Zelensky at the UN General Assembly after his speech. And so shortly after that meeting with Zelensky, President Trump came out with this incredible change. So let's read between the lines a little bit on this. What I believe happened is something that I've mentioned in recent days on other podcasts. President Zelensky has a new weapon at his disposal. It's a ballistic missile that is completely 100% manufactured in Ukraine, doesn't require any outside components, and it's called the Flamingo. It has about 1,000-kilogram warhead. It's a very large warhead. The many dozens, if not hundreds, of drones that Ukraine has been sending deep into Russia every day, the unmanned surface vehicles, the drone boats that Ukraine has been sending via the Black Sea into the Black Sea fleet almost every day. Those things don't have the destructive power of one of these ballistic missiles. Ukraine is now able, they say, to make 7 of these ballistic missiles every single day. But so far as I can tell, we've not seen any of them used in combat yet. We haven't seen any of them used against Russia. Why is that? Because this has been going on for a couple of months at least. And so that means that theoretically, Ukraine has perhaps 200 or 300 of these ballistic missiles ready to go. And why haven't they started using them? Well, my sense is they haven't started using them because Ukraine is saving up for a knockout blow. They're going to fire 200 or 300 of these missiles at Russia all at once. They're going to take out the Kerch Bridge completely. Matter of fact, let's go to the map and we can talk about that. So here's the map, which we were looking at. Let's see here. I'm going to go back to my other camera. Hang on a second. Let me pull my camera up so I can talk to you. And okay, there we go. All right. So this is Ukraine here. There's Crimea right there. This is, I don't know how to pronounce that, Novorossiysk. Novorossiysk. This is where the Black Sea Fleet is hiding right now. Okay. They did have some of them at Sevastopol over here in Crimea. Okay. Sevastopol is right here. The reason that the Russians want Crimea so badly is because they need the naval base at Sevastopol. This other base is not as well developed at Novorossiysk, but right now the entire Black Sea Fleet is over here at Novorossiysk because the Ukrainians were striking at Sevastopol with drone boats on a daily basis. Well, Novorossiysk is not out of range either. And as a matter of fact, today there was a flurry of attacks, both from the air and from the sea, on Novorossiysk and the shipyard there. And there's a lot of video coming out from that. Okay. Now, if you'll bear with me, I'm going to switch back to the Starlink because we get a better throughput with that. So I may lose you for just a second. And if the Starlink is back up, I'm going to go back. Well, no, tell you what, we'll do it this way. I'm going to connect directly to the Starlink. So if the power goes out again, we won't have that issue. Okay. So I believe Ukraine is planning a massive missile attack against Russia. Probably will hit Moscow. Will also hit the Kerch Bridge right here. This is a bridge they've been wanting to take out for some time. That would dramatically limit the Russians' options for resupplying their troops that are in the southern part of Ukraine down here. I would not be surprised if they don't hit more oil and natural gas facilities all across Russia, because Ukraine has figured out that bombing, they can bomb troops in the field and kill a few troops, and that's not going to change much. They can bomb headquarters elements. That's not going to change much. They get replaced fairly quickly. They can bomb supply depots, and Russia just moves more supplies in very quickly. But what they're striking at now are the pocketbook of Russia. They're striking at the source of their income, which is their oil and natural gas. That, combined with low oil prices that we see right now, is hurting Russia so badly that Russia may actually lose this war economically before they lose it on the battlefield. Now, one other thing I want to point out about the war in Ukraine. Russia has been saying for some time that they only want like the Donetsk and Luhansk regions. They don't want to to take any more of Ukraine. They only want Donetsk, Luhansk, Kherson, and Zaporizhia. Those 4 oblasts down in the south and the east. And if that was the case, they probably would not be pushing into the Kharkiv Oblast, which is further north from Donetsk, and trying to take that oblast as well. So what the Institute for the Study of War is pointing out in their most recent report is Russia says one thing, but their actions on the battlefield say something very, very different. Russia still has designs on all of Ukraine, the entire thing. And so I'll pull up a map from the Institute of Study of War so you can see what I'm talking about. The most recent overview of, let's see here, most recent update has this map. I'm going to pull up this map here for you. Where's my, come on. Go back and look at this map. Okay, so here we have Ukraine. That's Ukraine right there. This is Crimea. This area here, you see how it's got that kind of cross hatching in the colors. I don't know if I can zoom that in or not. Let's see if I can zoom that in a little bit for you. Let's see here. I'm going to zoom in on that. Okay, so you look here at the areas that Russia controls in red. The ones that have the cross hatching on it here and down here are areas that Russia controlled before the war started in 2022, that they took over in 2014. The just plain red areas are the areas Russia has taken since then. But what we're seeing is that up here near Kharkiv, Russia is pushing in these 2 spots. These 2 spots up here, and trying to take more ground in the Kharkiv Oblast. It bears repeating that Russia is not doing very well on the battlefield. It's been more than 3 years. They have yet to take, the rate at which they are taking ground in Ukraine is slowing. It will take them a couple 100 years at the rate they're going right now to actually take over all of Ukraine, and it would cost them 20 or 30 million dead to do it. So it's not likely that Russia will be able to take Ukraine militarily. It's also looking worse and worse on the economic front for Ukraine. And so I think what caused President Trump to put out this post on social media and to completely change his tune is that he's starting to see the writing on the wall. And he's seeing that Ukraine is about to win this war without us. And if President Trump has been saying all along, you've got no cards to play, you should not have started this war, you can't win a war against a bigger opponent, all that stuff. And he's proven very, very wrong, because Ukraine is showing that they have cards to play. It's called the Flamingo ballistic missile. They are holding their own pretty well against a much larger foe, and they are managing to strike at the heart of what funds Russia's war machine. Doing those 3 things is going to make President Trump look pretty bad if he continued on his previous tack, which was critical of Ukraine and, saying there's no way they can win the war. So President Trump is changing his tune because he sees those issues there. And I have a feeling that Vladimir Zelensky said something to President Trump in their closed-door meeting that, hey, just wait and see. You're going to see something big happening in Russia very, very soon. Another thing that we've seen that is hurting Russia economically is, you remember the drone attack that Ukraine did, where they managed to smuggle a bunch of drones into Ukraine very, very deep, and then take off using artificial intelligence to track down and strike at Russia's long-range strategic bombers, which are irreplaceable. Russia cannot make more of them. Remember when that happened? I think they called it Operation Spiderweb or Spider-Man or something like that. Well, the fallout from that is that Russia is cracking down on all of the trucks that are coming into Russia, searching every single truck from top to bottom. And what that's causing are massive backups at the borders of Russia, even in, for example, Kazakhstan, where I just visited Kazakhstan a few weeks ago. And from Kazakhstan, they're saying it's a 3-week wait at the border if you're a truck driver and you want to take a load of goods into Russia. How many truck drivers do you think are going to really want to sit there for 3 weeks? Because those border crossings, there's not like a big city there. It's very remote, out in the middle of the desert. These guys are camping. They're sleeping on the ground underneath their trucks for 3 weeks waiting to get through. And so that is an additional drain on Russia's economy. Makes it much harder to get things that they need into Russia. And Russia has been crying out to China, begging for help. And so what we've seen is that at Novorossiysk there, that base that I showed you before, there was a Chinese cargo ship that docked there yesterday. And a lot of people are wondering, like, hey, what's going on with that? What's China offloading to Russia? A very large Chinese cargo ship. That could portend China taking a more active role in trying to prop up Russia. And because China has a vested interest in seeing this war continue for as long as possible. They don't care about Russia. They don't care whether or not Russia gets completely decimated economically. That would actually be a good thing for China because it's going to give them a bigger discount on their oil purchases, and they share a border with Russia that has been contentious at times. So China might actually be able to take back some land from Russia if Russia completely collapses. But they want the war to continue because it is also expensive on China's adversaries, the United States and Western Europe. So we'll have to wait and see whether or not we see more of this coming from Russia or not, or from China or not, in the near future. But that's definitely something to keep our eyes on. Okay, we've been over an hour now, but I just do want to get to the questions. So let me go over here and pull up the questions. If you've been patiently waiting, I don't want you to be upset that I blew off the questions. So I'm going to go through them as quickly as I can here and try to answer all your questions. Okay, from Cheryl Miller. Do you think elevator and teleprompter is linked to yesterday's attempted cyber attack? No, I think if anything, it was some anti-Trump people at the UN who were just trolling President Trump. Or it could have just been the fact that the UN needs some maintenance. I don't know. Bruce Clark says, is there any type of quality control at the UN? Who checks what they spend? Not really. They're not in the way that there should be. And that's one of the things President Trump was talking about in his speech. Gia asks, what's the name of the book on gold? I think it's called Gold and the Bible, if I remember right. I saw an ad for it online and I bought it and read it. Bob in Indiana says, don't we buy some oil from Russia? No, we do not. The United States does not buy oil from Russia. We may end up buying some derivatives of Russian oil from countries like Azerbaijan, Turkey, whatever. But I think even there, we've been pretty careful to get rid of that. Brian Searcy says, what do you think of Abbas calling for reparations paid to them by the British? I talked about that on yesterday's podcast. I think it's ironic and hilarious. The UK recognizes a Palestinian state, and the first thing the president of the Palestinian Authority does is call for $2 trillion in reparations from the UK for the 1948, 1913 to 1948 time when the British ruled that area. That's just too good, too good. Mike Silva says, what's the strategic reason Trump would move forward with the level of patience rather than run and gun? I'm not sure what you mean by that, Mike, so I'm going to have to skip that one. Michael said, were you a Christian before you joined the military? Yes, I was. I was a Christian since a little boy, grew up in the church. My father and grandfather were both Baptist ministers. And so, yeah, I was. Bill Buchholz says, do you think the president is having his people watch your show? I know some of the president's people have watched my show, people like Sebastian Gorka, people like that. So maybe, could be, I don't know. Hope so, that'd be great. Country Boy asks, will Russia nuke if Ukraine comes with the knockout punch? I don't think Russia is going to resort to nukes because if they do, nukes will be used against Russia. Russia, just like President said in his speech to the UN yesterday, these kinds of weapons can never be used because they're just far too destructive. They will destroy the entire planet. One nuke by Russia opens up Pandora's box, not just to nukes against Russia because it's not just the United States. There are other countries in Europe that have nukes. And we might not be able to stop it. But that also just breaks the taboo of using nukes. And so Pakistan and India start using nukes, and North Korea uses nukes on South Korea. South Korea uses nukes on, I mean, it could go out of control in a big hurry. And I want to say Putin is crazy, but not stupid. And he's smart enough to know that if his goal is to remain in power, using a nuke is the fastest way to lose power for him. So I don't think they will. They're going to continue to threaten. They've been threatening since the beginning of the war. And I think everybody knows you use a nuke, your own country goes bye-bye. Mike Silva says, how long would you say they planned for that attack? 6 months or so? They said 18 months they planned for that attack. I'm talking about Operation Spiderweb or Ukrainian attack on Russia. Maybe you're talking about a different attack. That's the one I'm talking about. Alley Cat says, you might want to do a recap of this broadcast. You cut in and out so much, especially when discussing Trump's speech at the UN. I couldn't understand what you were talking about. I went through the various topics that President Trump talked about in his speech. I'm sorry my power went out. That I can't do anything about that. But we will put out a condensed version of this live that cuts out all of the technical problems and stuff, so you can wait and watch that when it comes out very shortly. Petra Michelle says, what's the name of the drug and alcohol rehabilitation center that you support? It's called Brian's Safe House. And Brian's Safe House is in Beckley, West Virginia, and I highly recommend it. There's also a good one called The Rock in Charleston, West Virginia that we have supported from time to time as well. Will Weisenfield said, do you think either the U.S. or Israel will strike Iran after the Houthi success with 2 Iranian-made drones in a few weeks? Israel certainly will strike the Houthis, and it is very, very likely that there will be more strikes on Iran before this is all over. Now, are they going to do it anytime soon? Probably not, because the planning for a strike like that takes more time than you think. Israel is definitely planning its next series of strikes on Iran. But it takes a long time to put those plans together. There's a lot of moving parts. So I do think there will be more strikes on Iran. I just don't think they're going to come in the next couple of weeks. Okay? All right, that's all the questions we got. Thank you very much for watching. For all of you who support the channel over at Locals, it means a tremendous amount to me. We're putting a lot of extra content up over on Locals. Just go to chuckholton.com and become a supporter over there if you want to support what we're doing. Keep us on the road. I will be back on the road here in a couple of weeks, but first we have a tour of Hot Zonians who's coming down to Panama for a retreat. And I'm looking forward to meeting some of you face to face. That's going to be a great time. That'll be coming up here in about a week. So you should get on those tours. We have another tour to Panama scheduled next April. And of course, as I mentioned, the tour to Armenia next June. If you want to travel with me, meet me face to face, get on one of those tours, and we'll enjoy getting to be friends. If you are a member over at chuckholton.com, you can have face-to-face meetings with me once a month. We do Zoom calls where you can ask me your questions and give me your thoughts directly without having to type them into the chat box. So please make sure you hit the like button on the way out. I looked yesterday and only 55% of people who are watching these lives have actually watched them before. 45% of the people who are watching, it's their first time ever watching our show. That's mind-boggling to me. But if you are watching, make sure you hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Then you can get notified when we go live and we'll discuss the topics of the day. So God bless you. Thank you very much. And I may not be live tomorrow because I have to go pick up some friends from the airport. And so I'll be traveling tomorrow, but if I can get a live out tomorrow, it might be later in the afternoon. So stay tuned for that. Again, God bless you all. Thank you very much for watching. We'll see you next time.